So I currently live in Hingetown, a neighborhood within Ohio City, the historic neighborhood of Ohio City. While technically a part of the city of Cleveland, it is not downtown. It's actually a mile west of downtown on the west side of the Cuyahoga River, an Indian word meaning crooked. All this land used to be controlled by Native Americans, and it wasn't until the early part of the 19th century when people like Josiah Barber, who was the founder of Ohio City, he founded this area in 1818, they start coming in from Connecticut to what was known as the Western Reserve, and they try and push the natives westward because this was after the Articles of Confederation, which acknowledged the Northwest Territory, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which, by the way, were the first states to be abolish slavery. Anyways, they pushed the natives out. They found this city of Ohio, the city of Ohio, in around 1818. So Ohio City has the largest concentration of microbreweries in Cleveland, from Platform Beer to Nano Brew, Market Garden, to one of the oldest in Ohio right behind me, Great Lakes Brewing Company, which is on the old site of Market Tavern, a pub that Eliot Ness actually used to frequent when he lived here. Now, Ohio City was also home to many of the early Irish immigrants to this area in the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s. They were here to dig the Ohio Erie Canal, okay? And yes, they had to dig by hand over 300 miles of canal, getting paid in mostly whiskey, okay? Now, another little anecdote I like to tell about Ohio City is that during the 1830s, they actually got into an actual war with Cleveland. The short of it is, it's a very long story, but the short of it is, Cleveland was jealous of Ohio City's rapid growth thanks to the West Side Market and the influx of produce from Medina County coming in, that Cleveland decided to blow up their half of the floating bridge in the flats near what was nowadays the Red Swing Bridge, okay? Ohio City did not take too kindly to this. Cleveland decides to build another bridge farther south that way because the mayor was friends with this guy who ran Central Market. They wanted to build a bridge closer to the Central Market. So Ohio City residents storm that bridge with axes and guns with the rallying cry, "Two bridges or none," okay? And they met a mob of angry Clevelanders, and there was some loss of life, some bloodshed. Thankfully, officers and deputies stopped the war. The courts actually ordered, they favored Ohio City, they ordered Cleveland to rebuild the bridge. However, Cleveland got the last straw because they annexed Ohio City in 1854, and that is why this historic neighborhood of Ohio City is now part of Cleveland. So another claim to fame for Ohio City is that it's the birthplace of John Heisman. He was born in this house. I know it's not the prettiest of houses, but he was born in this house in 1869. One of the inventors of the game of football, many of the rules and strategies still used to this day, and of course his last name tops the most famous college football trophy given out every year. So here we are at Franklin Circle. This used to be the public square area of Ohio City, but I'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes about that. Now behind me, this is the Franklin Circle Christian Church, formed in 1842. What you see behind me, this is actually the second iteration of the church, built in 1875. But before that, before the Civil War, President James Garfield, who actually grew up on the east side in Orange, also lived in Mentor and in Hiram, he became the pastor of this church, would frequently have to take horse-drawn carriage all the way from Hiram to this west side location to give sermons. And actually at one point he asked for a $1 raise, which was probably a lot of money back then, but was promptly fired after he asked for that raise. And that was about 1857 or so. Now, after the Civil War, the millionaires move in. This is the prominent place to live. You've got people like Marcus Hanna and the Rhodes family that built mansions in this area. Why? Well, this was an open air market, okay? You had vendors coming in selling things, and it was a center of commerce. Okay, and at that time it was known as Franklin Square. Okay, and it was the first public park on the west side. Okay, now after the Civil War, turn of the century, the streetcars come in, the trolleys, automobiles, and whatnot, and then things like the Lutheran Hospital, the Masonic Temple move in. The millionaires move further out. Okay, and then it becomes Franklin Circle, not Franklin Square. Sort of its demise is starting, goes on after that. However, you can still see today where the circle used to be and where a lot of people used to frequent. Now, Hingetown is also home to the Robert Russell Rhodes mansion behind me, built in 1874. Legend goes, businessman Rhodes was really averse to being involved in politics and government. The irony is that his extended family was very involved in the local government, and also that throughout the 20th century and the 21st century, it's been home to the Cuyahoga County Public Records and Archives Department. Now, Hingetown is also home to the famous transformer station behind me. This was one of 16 substations built by the Cleveland Railway Company, sort of a private predecessor to the RTA. And these were used to power the electric streetcar lines over on Detroit Avenue that would transport people from downtown Cleveland out into the western suburbs. In its heyday, it transported somewhere around 20 million riders annually. And then due to the influx of automobiles, sort of shut down in 1950. By the way, this was built in around 1924. It is still operated as an art museum and gallery. I highly recommend checking it out these days. And then on my left, on your right, you will see a firehouse built in the 19th century, around the time of the Civil War. These days it's run as Rising Star Coffee Company. It's a hip, chic coffee place. And moving in just to the right is a new restaurant called Larder. Now, Hingetown itself actually has some fascinating history. Behind me, this is basically the downtown area of Hingetown, but it's very welcoming of the LGBT community. From the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they had a lot of LGBT-friendly bars, nightclubs, including a gay nightclub called Bounce that still exists. Very welcoming. It's very big in the month of Pride during July. But the new Ohio historical marker behind me that they recently put in attests to that fact. Now, here we are at one of the most famous sites in Hingetown and Ohio City, that of St. John's Episcopal Church, right behind me. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yes, that is also the name of the church that the presidents attend in Washington, D.C. Same name. This is the oldest building in Cleveland. 1834 this was built. And one of the founding members, Josiah Barber, who again founded Ohio City in 1818, he founded this along with people like George Lord Chapman and others. So one of the coolest facts about St. John's Episcopal Church is that it was a stopping ground, one of the last stopping grounds for the Underground Railroad. So escaped slaves coming from the south, trying to get to Canada and freedom in the north. This would be one of their final stops. They would hide in the bell tower up top, where some of the shackles removed from their wrists and hands can still be seen today. They would look out, see if they could see signals coming from Lake Erie to tell them that the coast was clear to get on these ferries and ships bound for Canada. Now, the National Episcopal Church did not take a stance one way or the other in terms of if they were opposed to slavery or for it. And that's why it begs the question, who supported the Underground Railroad here? Who kind of started it, and who made this a stopping ground? It may have been George Lord Chapman, who was friends with John Foote, a stout abolitionist in this area, or it might have been Chapman's wife Eliza, who spent her life dedicated to helping the needy, the poor, the sick, and people like slaves.